Prepare to unlearn, because today we're not talking about fake news, we're not talking about lies, we're not even talking about manipulation in the obvious sense. We're talking about something far more subtle, far more powerful, and far more dangerous. We're talking about framing. The media doesn't need to lie to control what you believe. It just needs to decide how reality is presented to you, what gets highlighted, what gets minimized, what gets repeated, and what never appears at all. Because the most effective form of control is not telling people what to think, it's deciding what they think about. Most people believe the media's job is to inform, to present facts, to report reality as it is. That belief is comforting and completely wrong. The media does not show you reality, it shows you a version of reality, carefully packaged, filtered, and framed. And once you understand this, you'll never consume news the same way again. This video is not about accusing journalists of being evil. It's not about conspiracy theories. It's not about saying everything is fake. It's about understanding how perception is shaped, because two people can watch the same event and walk away believing completely opposite things, not because one is stupid, but because framing did the work. Let's start with a simple truth. Reality is infinite. News is finite. Every single day, millions of things happen in the world. The media can only show you a tiny fraction. That means selection is inevitable, and selection is power. What gets selected becomes important. What doesn't disappears. And here's the first uncomfortable realization. What the media ignores often matters more than what it shows. Now let's go deeper. Imagine two headlines covering the same protest. Headline A, citizens demand social justice in peaceful demonstration. Headline B, violent crowd disrupts public order. Same protest, same people, same facts, completely different reality. This is framing. No lies were told, no facts were invented, but the emotional conclusion was decided for you before you even started reading. This happens constantly. Economic crisis becomes market correction. Civilian deaths become collateral damage. Corporate decisions become necessary adjustments. Social collapse becomes challenging times. Language softens power. Language protects systems. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Framing doesn't just affect opinions, it affects what feels normal. When layoffs are framed as efficiency, people stop asking why efficiency always hurts workers and never shareholders. When wars are framed as defense, people stop asking who benefits financially from permanent conflict. When poverty is framed as personal failure, people stop questioning structural inequality. The frame decides where blame goes, and once blame is redirected, the system stays untouched. Now let's talk about neutrality. The media loves to present itself as neutral, objective, balanced, but framing makes true neutrality impossible. Even deciding to be neutral is already a position, because neutrality between power and the powerless always favors power. When media presents both sides of an issue without context, history, or power imbalance, it creates a false equivalence. Not all sides are equal. Not all voices have the same impact. Not all opinions carry the same consequences. But framing hides this. Now add corporate ownership to the equation. Most major media outlets are owned by large corporations. Corporations with interests, investments, political connections. This doesn't mean editors receive daily instructions on what to say. Control doesn't work like that anymore. It's far more efficient. Journalists learn over time which stories get promoted, which ones get buried, and which ones end careers. Self-censorship replaces censorship, not because of fear, but because of incentives. The result? Certain topics are discussed endlessly. Others are treated as fringe, radical, or unrealistic. Systemic critiques are framed as extreme. Structural reform is framed as dangerous. Questioning capitalism itself becomes taboo. But debates about culture, identity, and outrage, those are endless, because they divide people without threatening the economic core. This is not accidental. Framing channels anger away from structure and toward individuals, groups, or symbols. Now let's talk about speed. Modern media operates in real time. Breaking news, live updates, constant alerts. Speed kills depth. There's no time to analyze, no time to contextualize, no time to reflect. Emotion replaces understanding. Fear, outrage, and shock keep people engaged, and engagement is the currency of the media economy. Your attention is being sold, which means the goal is not clarity. The goal is retention. The more emotional you are, the longer you stay. This creates a distorted perception of reality. The world feels like it's constantly on fire. Permanent crisis, permanent emergency. When everything is urgent, nothing can be questioned deeply. And that's the perfect environment for framing to thrive, because frames work best when people are tired. Now let's address the biggest illusion of all. Many people believe they are immune to media influence. I just watch the news. I'm informed. I think for myself. But framing doesn't ask for permission. It works below consciousness. It shapes assumptions, expectations, emotional reactions. By the time you form an opinion, the frame has already done its job. This is why two people can consume different media ecosystems and live in completely different realities, different fears, different enemies, different priorities. Same country, same facts, different frames. And once those frames harden, dialogue becomes almost impossible. People are no longer arguing facts, they're arguing realities. Now here's the part that makes this truly uncomfortable. Framing doesn't only happen in bad media, it happens everywhere. Left-wing media frames, right-wing media frames, mainstream media frames, alternative media frames. The difference is not whether framing exists, it's who benefits from it, and whether the audience is aware of it. The most dangerous framing is the one you don't notice, because you mistake it for reality itself. If you've stayed this far, you've probably started to feel uncomfortable. That's not an accident, because once you understand framing, you realize something disturbing. Most of what you believe about the world was never discovered by you. It was introduced, not as a lie, not as manipulation in a cartoon villain sense, but as context. And context is power. Let's break this down. Imagine the same event. A protest erupts in the city. If the headline says, "Citizens demand justice after years of neglect," you feel empathy. If it says, "Violent mob disrupts public order," you feel fear. Same event, same people, same streets, different reality. That's framing. And once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. The media doesn't need to invent facts. It only needs to decide how facts are arranged. What comes first? What comes last? What gets repeated? What disappears? Repetition is especially powerful. If an idea is repeated enough, it stops feeling like an opinion and starts feeling like common sense. This is how economic responsibility, national security, market confidence, and necessary sacrifices become untouchable concepts. They're rarely questioned, they're assumed. Now let's talk about experts. Every news outlet loves experts, economists, analysts, strategists, consultants. They appear neutral, objective, technical. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Experts don't just analyze reality, they interpret it through a framework. And most experts invited into mainstream media operate inside the same dominant worldview. Market-first logic, growth-first logic, stability-first logic. Alternatives exist, but they're labeled unrealistic, ideological, or extreme. So the debate looks plural, while staying safely inside invisible boundaries. That's not censorship, that's filtering. And filtering is far more effective. Now let's look at what rarely gets framed as news. Structural causes. Media loves events. It struggles with systems. A shooting becomes breaking news. Gun policy becomes a debate for a week. A financial collapse becomes a headline. The system that creates recurring collapses is barely examined. Why? Because systems are boring on television. They don't fit into short segments. They don't generate instant emotion, and emotion drives engagement, outrage, fear, hope, shock. These are profitable. Structural understanding is not. This leads to a subtle but devastating consequence. People become extremely informed about events and deeply ignorant about patterns. They know what happened yesterday. They don't know why it keeps happening. And this ignorance isn't accidental. It's functional. Now let's talk about neutrality. Media organizations often claim neutrality, balance, objectivity, but neutrality in a system with power imbalance always favors the powerful. When one side controls resources, narratives, and institutions, and the other side controls frustration, neutrality freezes the advantage in place. Presenting both sides does not mean presenting the truth. It often means presenting conflict without context, and context is exactly what framing controls. Here's another uncomfortable point. The media doesn't tell you what to think. It tells you what to think about. Agenda setting. If an issue never appears, it effectively doesn't exist in public debate. Think about how rarely certain topics are discussed. Corporate lobbying as systemic corruption, media ownership concentration, the role of financial speculation in everyday life, the structural limits of democracy, not absent by mistake, absent by design, because these topics threaten the frame itself. Now let's talk about language. Language is never neutral. Reforms usually mean cuts. Flexibility often means insecurity. Austerity is framed as responsibility. Stability often means preserving inequality. Once language is framed positively, opposition sounds irrational. Who would oppose stability? Who would oppose responsibility? The framing does the work before the argument even begins, and this is where the media becomes the most powerful political actor in the modern world. Not because it controls governments, but because it shapes what governments can say without being punished by narrative backlash. Presidents fear headlines, politicians fear framing, markets fear perception. The media sits at the intersection of all three. And here's the final realization of this section. Most people don't defend the system consciously. They defend the frame. They defend what feels normal, what feels realistic, what feels inevitable. Framing turns ideology into common sense. And common sense is the hardest thing to challenge. In the next and final part, we're going to answer the most important question of all. If the media frames reality, who benefits from that frame? And what happens when people start seeing outside it? By now, one thing should be clear. The media doesn't need to lie to shape reality. It only needs to decide how reality is presented, because most people don't experience the world directly. They experience it through screens, headlines, clips, charts, and experts. And whoever controls the frame controls the meaning. This is why two people can watch the same event and come away with completely opposite conclusions, not because one is stupid, not because one is evil, but because they were given different frames. One saw a protest, the other saw a riot. One saw economic reform, the other saw social cruelty. One saw national security, the other saw imperial aggression. Same facts, different story. Now let's talk about the most dangerous part of framing, what is never framed at all, the absence, the stories that never become headlines, the questions that are never asked, the assumptions that are never challenged. Silence is not neutral. Silence is a decision. When structural issues disappear from the news, they don't disappear from reality. They just become normal. And once something becomes normal, people stop questioning it. This is how entire systems survive for decades without serious debate. The media doesn't say, here is the system that benefits a few at the expense of many. Instead, it says, here is today's scandal. Outrage replaces understanding. Now consider this. If the media truly existed to inform, it would constantly explain how power works, not just who is in power. It would focus less on personalities and more on incentives, less on drama, more on structure. But structure is boring. Structure doesn't go viral. Structure doesn't trigger instant emotion. And emotion is the currency of modern media. Fear, anger, moral outrage. These emotions keep you watching, clicking, sharing, but they don't help you see clearly. In fact, they do the opposite. They keep you reactive. A reactive audience is easy to guide. A reflective audience is dangerous. This is why media framing is not about education. It's about management, managing attention, managing emotion, managing limits of debate. Now let's address a common defense. But I watch different outlets. I see both sides. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most sides operate inside the same frame. They disagree on answers, but rarely on assumptions. They debate policies, not the system that produces them. They argue outcomes, not the incentives behind those outcomes. This gives the illusion of pluralism. But real pluralism would feel deeply uncomfortable. It would challenge the foundations. And foundations are not good for ratings. So instead, we get safe conflict, loud disagreement over narrow ground. This is why media discussions often feel intense but go nowhere. They are designed to circulate energy, not produce insight. And here comes the most important realization of all. Once you understand framing, you can't consume media the same way again. You start asking different questions. Why is this story framed this way? What perspective is missing? Who benefits from this interpretation? What would this look like from another country, another class, another interest? You stop asking, is this true? And start asking, true according to whom? This doesn't make you cynical, it makes you literate. Media literacy is not about spotting fake news. That's the easy part. It's about seeing the invisible architecture behind real news. And this is precisely why framing is rarely explained. Because once people see it, they stop being easily managed. They stop reacting automatically. They pause, they think, and thinking is the enemy of manipulation. So let's be very clear. The media is not evil. Journalists are not villains. This is not a conspiracy. It is a system shaped by incentives, ratings, advertising, access, power. The frame exists because it works, but understanding it gives you something powerful. Distance. Distance from panic. Distance from outrage. Distance from manufactured urgency. You regain the ability to choose what actually deserves your attention, and attention is your most valuable resource. The media will never tell you this, because once you see the frame, you are no longer inside it. If this video made you uncomfortable, good. If it made you question how you consume information, even better. And if you know someone who believes the media simply shows reality, share this video with them. Not to argue, not to convince, but to plant a crack. Subscribe to this channel, because here we don't tell you what to think. We show you what you were never supposed to notice. Prepare to unlearn.